The night I finally read her phone, I sat on the floor of my own apartment in Rio de Janeiro, in the dark, and I laughed. Not because anything was funny. I laughed the way a man laughs when the last thing he believed in turns out to be made of paper. I'd crossed 4,000 miles for that woman. I'd rebuilt my whole life around her smile. And there it was, glowing in my hands, in a language I'd spent a year teaching myself to read. Every message I was never supposed to see. My name is Gary Whitfield. People call me Gary. I'm 66 years old. I'm from Toledo, Ohio, and I spent 40 years standing at the same machine in the same plant, making parts for cars I could never quite afford. I am not a dramatic man. I'm the kind of man who reads the instructions, who keeps the receipts, who never once in his life caused a scene. So believe me when I tell you, the story I'm about to tell you is the last story I ever expected to be mine. If you're an older man and you've been alone longer than you'd ever admit to your friends, and somewhere in the back of your chest, there's still a small stubborn hope that it's not too late for you, I need you to stay with me until the end. Because what happened to me in Rio is the most alive I've ever felt and the most foolish I've ever been. And I've never told the whole thing to a living soul. Tonight I'm telling you. But to understand the night I read that phone, you have to understand the silence I came out of. So let me take you back to Toledo. Diane and I were married for 36 years. We met young, we stayed married, and we were the boring kind of happy that nobody makes movies about. She did the talking for both of us. I did the fixing. That was the arrangement. And for 36 years, it held. Then she got sick. Lungs. She never smoked a day in her life, and it didn't matter. It took 14 months, and then it took her. And I won't sit here and describe it to you, because if you've watched somebody you love disappear a little every morning, you already know. And if you haven't, I pray you've got a long, long time before you do. What nobody warns you about is the after. The silence isn't really silence. It's a sound. It's the refrigerator humming in a house where nobody's coming home. It's the second coffee cup you keep reaching for out of habit and then putting back. It's the television you leave on all night so the place doesn't feel like the inside of a coffin. I lived inside that sound for almost 5 years. My buddies from the plant would call. We'd get a beer. They'd drive home to their wives. And I'd drive back to a house that got quieter every single year. On paper, I was fine. Social Security, about $1,800 a month. A little put away. The house paid off. But a man can be fine on paper and be slowly going out like a pilot light, and nobody at the bank can see it on a statement. It was a video that did it. Some fella online, my age, sunburned, sitting on a beach in Brazil in the middle of January, grinning at the camera. And he says, "Back home this check kept me alive. Down here it gives me a life." I laughed it off and went to bed. And then I lay there in the dark and I did the thing that destroys and saves a man my age. I started doing the arithmetic. Rio de Janeiro, the exchange rate. I ran those numbers so many times I had them memorized. The same $1,800 that bought me a quiet little nothing in Toledo could buy me an apartment, real food, a life with the sun in it, somewhere far from that humming refrigerator. And I'll be straight with you, because this story is worthless if I'm not. It was never really about the money. The money was just the permission slip. The money was the excuse I needed to admit the thing I couldn't say out loud even to myself, that I did not want to die alone in Ohio, that I wanted to feel warm again, that I wanted, just once more before the end, for somebody to look at me like I mattered. So at 66 years old, I did the most reckless thing I have ever done. I sold the house Diane and I built. I put what I couldn't bear to part with in a storage unit. I bought a one-way ticket, and I got on a plane to a city where I knew not one single soul and could say maybe 5 words of the language. My sister told me I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. I got on the plane anyway. Nothing prepares you for Rio. Nothing. You drop down through the clouds, and the whole thing opens up underneath you. The ocean going out forever. Those green mountains shoving straight up out of the middle of the city. And that statue on the hill with his arms thrown open, like he's been waiting for you specifically. And something in your chest that had been asleep for years just sits up. Then you land, and the heat wraps around you like a wet blanket, and everybody's talking that fast, beautiful Portuguese I'd spend the next year mangling, and it hits you all at once that you are a 66-year-old widower from Toledo, alone in one of the biggest cities in the Southern Hemisphere. I sat in the back of that cab clutching one bag, soaked through my shirt, somewhere between scared to death and more awake than I'd felt since the funeral. I'd rented a small place in a neighborhood called Botafogo, off the internet, never seen it. 1 bedroom, a kitchen you could barely turn around in, and a window that, if you stood at the right angle, gave you the bottom of the mountain and a piece of sky. Every morning I made my terrible coffee at that window and told myself the same thing. All right, Gary, you did it. Now figure out how to live. The first weeks were brutal in a way I didn't expect. The loneliness had bought a ticket too. It followed me right onto the plane and into that apartment. I'd practice phrases off an app. I'd nod at the old man who ran the little market on the corner, and he started teaching me a word a day, patient as a saint. It wasn't much, but it was a person looking at me, glad I'd come in. After 5 years of that refrigerator, you have no idea what that's worth. And then, one morning, on the Copacabana boardwalk, everything changed. I'd started walking early, before the heat got mean, out on that famous black and white wave pavement, the ocean just rolling in like it had all the time in the world. Old Brazilian men already out doing their stretches. I'd buy a coffee from a kiosk, and there was a woman I'd see most mornings, Bea. Dark hair pulled back, walking fast, always on the phone, always laughing. You'd hear the laugh before you saw her. I never would have said a word. 66, gray, a foreigner. I knew exactly what that looked like, and I wasn't going to be that man. But one morning, the wind took the napkin right out of my hand and plastered it against her leg, and I'm apologizing in my broken Portuguese, going red in the face, and she just laughs and says, in English, "Relax, gringo. It is only a napkin. You look like you killed someone." That was the first thing Beatriz ever said to me. She worked the front desk at a small hotel over in Botafogo, near my place, and did nails on the side. She'd learned her English from years of foreign guests and from the soap operas, and she spoke it fearlessly, which I came to understand is the only way anybody ever really learns. She sat with me while I drank my coffee, and she asked me what an old American was doing alone on the boardwalk at dawn, and I was too tired and too far from home to lie. So I told her about Diane, about the quiet house, about selling everything and getting on a plane. She didn't laugh at that part. She got still and looked out at the water a long while, and then she said, "So, you are very brave, or very stupid." And I said, "Most mornings, I honestly can't tell." And she laughed. A real one this time. And something that had been clenched in my chest for 5 years let go. Just a hair. I'm going to tell you about the good months now, and I'm asking you to really listen to this part. Because later, when you're shaking your head at me, calling me an old fool, I need you to know it wasn't all a performance. Nobody is that good. Or maybe somebody is, and I'm the proof. You can decide at the end. She gave me the city. That's the only way I can say it. She walked me through a Rio the tourists never touch. The little places where the food is cooked right. The back lanes of Santa Teresa. The Sunday market where she'd argue over mangoes and translate the insults for me, cackling. She'd fix my Portuguese, make me say a word 10 times until I got it. We'd watch the sun go down from Arpador with that whole crowd that gathers there every evening, and when it dropped behind the mountains, everybody clapped, every single night, like the day had earned a hand. And I'd stand there with this woman's arm through mine and think, 5 years ago, I was leaving the TV on so I wouldn't hear the quiet, and now a whole city is applauding the sky. About 3 months in, she asked if I'd like to meet her family, and God help me, I said yes, and I meant it with my whole heart. Her mother, Dona Fatima, lived up in Madureira in the North Zone in a small house at the top of a steep, busy lane, the kind of place the news back home would have slapped one ugly word on and gotten the whole thing wrong. Because what I found up there was not what I'd been warned about my whole life. I found a tiny house overflowing with people and food and noise. Dona Fatima took one look at this big gray gringo bending through her doorway and grabbed my face in both hands and said something fast and warm, and Bia translated, laughing. She says you are too pale and too thin and she is going to fix you. There was Bia's son, Davy, 14, glued to his phone, who gave me one suspicious look and a grunt. There was her brother, Anderson, who sized me up across the table the way a brother should, hard at first, then softening over a long lunch and too much beer. By the end of that afternoon, I was full of food and full of something I hadn't felt since before Diane got sick. I belonged somewhere. After 5 years of one fork on one plate, I'd sat at a loud, crowded, joyful table, and I had never in my life felt more like part of something. That's the picture I want you to hold. Me at that table, grinning like a kid, with no idea what I was sitting in the middle of, because I didn't see how tight the money was in that little house. I didn't see Dona Fatima's medicine lined up on the shelf. I didn't catch the look that went around when somebody mentioned the Americano who'd sold his house back in the States. I didn't see any of it. I'd come to Rio to stop being alone, and a man that lonely will walk straight off a cliff as long as the cliff is warm and someone's holding his hand. The first time Bia asked me for money, she cried. I need you to understand exactly how it happened, because you're sitting there sure you'd have seen it coming. You wouldn't. I didn't, and I'm nobody's fool. It was maybe 4 months in. We were together by then, really together. She stayed at my place in Botafogo most nights. And one evening she came in off a shift just wrong. Quiet. Folded into herself. It came out of her in pieces. Dona Fatima's blood pressure. The heart medicine that can't wait a month. Anderson laid off again. And Bia had been quietly covering it out of her own pay. And she'd come up short. And she was ashamed. And she hadn't wanted to tell me. Because, and this is the line that got me right through the ribs, because she didn't want me thinking she was with me for my money. It wasn't much. Back home it was a nice dinner out. For a sick woman's heart medicine. What kind of man do you think I am? I had the money in her hand before she finished the sentence. And the relief on her face, the way she pressed my hand to her cheek, I felt 10 feet tall. After 40 years of being useful with my hands, and 5 years of being useful to nobody at all, I got to be needed again by somebody I loved. And that, right there, is the trap. Hear me. The trap was never the money. The trap is how good it feels to be needed again. Because it didn't stop at the heart medicine. It was Davy's school fees. Then a laptop for school. Then Anderson had a sure thing. A friend with a little auto shop who just needed a bit of startup money. And I could be a partner. A real opportunity. Family looking out for family. Then the roof up in Madureira. Then the medicine again. Always, always, back to the medicine, which I never once questioned. Because what kind of monster makes a sick old woman prove she's sick? And every time, it came the same way. Always Bia who asked, never the others. Always with shame. Always small enough on its own that saying no would have made me a cheap, cold old man. It was never one big number you could choke on and refuse. It was 100 small cuts, and every single one came wrapped in love. So I paid. Of course I paid. I told myself this was just what family costs, that this was the price of not being alone, and wasn't it a bargain next to that humming refrigerator? But the money from the house, the cushion, the little I'd saved Diane and me our whole lives, I watched it slide down, month after month, and a man who's worked his whole life knows the exact feeling in his gut when the numbers start running the wrong way. I stopped sleeping again. I'd lie there next to this beautiful woman and do arithmetic in the dark and hate myself for doing arithmetic instead of just being grateful. And then there was the phone. It started small, the way these things do. She used to leave her phone anywhere, on the counter, the bed, face up, buzzing away. And then, somewhere in there, she didn't anymore. It was always face down, always in her hand or her bag. A passcode appeared that hadn't been there before. She started taking calls out on the little balcony with the door slid shut, her voice low, and coming back in too bright, too quick to change the subject. Late messages that lit the room at 2 a.m, that she'd reach over and silence without a word. I told myself 100 stories. My Portuguese was bad. I was misreading her. It was her mother. It was the salon. It was Anderson and his shop. I am a man who can talk himself out of anything he's afraid is true, and I was very, very afraid this was true. For 3 weeks I managed it. And then one night she fell asleep before me, dead tired off a double shift, and the phone lit up on the nightstand. Once. Twice. A name I didn't know. Diego. And I lay there staring at the ceiling of an apartment I'd crossed the world to live in, and I knew that if I picked it up, nothing would ever be the same, and that if I didn't, I'd never sleep another night in my life. I picked it up. I'm not proud of what I did next, and I'd do it again tomorrow. I sat on the bathroom floor with that phone, and I read. A year of teaching myself this language, sounding out menus and street signs like a schoolboy, and here was my final exam, glowing in my hands at 3 a.m. It wasn't a soap opera. There was no secret husband, no criminal plot. It was smaller than that, and somehow, so much worse. Diego was a man from her old life, an ex, then not an ex, then something there was no clean word for. And around him, threaded through months of messages, was a thing I can only call a plan. Patient, gentle, spoken about almost tenderly, between her and Anderson, and once even with her mother. Keep the Americano happy. Keep him calm. Don't push too hard. He is a good man. He will last a while yet. The medicine was real. I could see that too, woven all the way through. The genuine fear about her mother. And that's exactly what made the rest of it unforgivable. Real love and a cold ledger. Living in the same woman, in the same thread, on the same night. I didn't wake her. I sat on that floor until the sky over the mountain went gray and then pink, and I let myself feel all of it. The fool, the fury, the heartbreak. And then I did the only thing I've ever truly known how to do. 40 years at that machine taught me to find what is actually broken, not what merely looks broken. So when the light came up, I knew what was broken, and I knew it couldn't be fixed. I confronted her in my own kitchen in Botafogo, with the window open and the city already loud below us. I didn't yell. I have never been a yeller. 40 years on a shop floor teaches you the loud ones are the ones who don't know what they're doing. I just set the phone on the table between us, turned to the messages, and I asked her one quiet question. How long? And here's the part I'll carry to my grave. She didn't reach for a lie. She looked down at that table, and her eyes filled, and she said, "From the start, a little of it was for them. I am not going to lie to you now. But not all of it, Gary. Not us. You have to believe me about us." And the worst thing, the thing that still finds me at 3 a.m, is that I think she was telling the truth. She had used me. And somewhere in the middle of using me, she had also come to love me, in the tangled, desperate way that people who grew up with nothing learn to love the person who finally has a little something. Both true, at the very same time, and both of them together still broke me clean in half. For about 10 seconds, and God forgive me, I thought about staying, because that silent house back in Toledo was still in me. It is always in me. I could keep the warmth and the boardwalk and the whole city clapping at the sundown. And all I had to do was agree, for the rest of my life, to never ask another question. To be the good man who lasts a while yet. And then I heard my own voice, steadier than I felt, say the word I'd crossed 4,000 miles, praying I would never have to say. I said no. She moved out over the next 2 days. It was quiet, and it was awful, and I won't walk you through every hour of it. At the door, my door, where I'd once stood red-faced over a napkin, she stopped. She didn't shout, and she didn't cry. She just looked at me a long moment and said, "You came here so you would not be alone, and now look what you did." And she left. And the cruelest part, the part that still gets me on the bad nights, is that she wasn't entirely wrong. So here's where I am now. If you've stayed with me this far, and thank you truly for staying. I'm still in Rio. That surprises people. They figure I'd have crawled back to Ohio, with my tail between my legs. But standing in that emptied out apartment at 4 a.m, with a view of the mountain and nobody left to show it to, I finally understood the one thing this whole expensive year had been trying to teach me. Rio never lied to me. Bia, in the end, barely even lied to me. I lied to me. I came down here to buy my way out of being alone, and you cannot do it. There is no exchange rate for that. No check is ever big enough. So I changed how I live. I learned the language for real this time, my own slow, stubborn Portuguese, because I decided I would never again be a man who needed somebody else to translate the world before he was allowed to be loved by it. I made friends my own age, a couple of expats, a few locals, the kind of people who have never once asked me for a thing. The old man at the corner market and I have a coffee most mornings now, and I understand most of what he says. And the money? I'm careful now. I live on my 1800 the way I should have from the very first day. And you know what? It still stretches further here than it ever did back home. That part was always true. That part never lied. I saw Bia once more, months later, on the boardwalk, early, the way the whole thing started. She was on the phone, laughing, the way she always was. She saw me. We both slowed down, And then we just nodded at each other. Two people who'd been real with each other inside of something that wasn't. And we kept walking in opposite directions into the rest of our lives. I don't hate her. I find that I can't. You can't hate a person for being what a hard life made them. And you can't hate yourself forever for being a man who only ever wanted to be warm. So if you're out there right now, 60, 65, 70, sitting in a too quiet house, watching a video like this one, and feeling something stir that you thought was dead, I am not going to tell you don't. I did it, and even after everything I just told you, I would do it again tomorrow. The sun is real. The clapping at the sundown is real. A second chance at being alive is as real as the screen you're looking at. Just come for the life. Don't come to fix the loneliness with somebody else's hands. Bring that part with you already mended, or it will cost you everything you sold the house for. I'm Gary. That's my Rio story. The whole thing, finally said out loud. If any of it landed on you tonight, do me one favor and hit that subscribe button, because I'm going to keep telling you the truth about this life down here. The beautiful and the brutal. No commercials. And tell me in the comments, would you have read the phone? Be honest with me. Some nights I still don't know if I'm glad I did. Take care of yourselves out there. And whatever else you do, don't die of quiet. There's a whole loud, warm, dangerous, beautiful world out here, and some of us are still in it. Dramatized story, told in the style of the channel, for storytelling and entertainment.